Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Good to have you with us as we do a study in Titus. And this is for June 2nd, 2024, but you can listen to it any time that you want, even years later. And as we come to Titus chapter 2, we see that older men, older women, younger women, and all of us together have a united testimony to those around us, and they watch us and formulate their opinions because, frankly, they're not reading the Bible. They're reading our lives, and there are standards of dignity and standards of action that even the unbelievers have. And if we don't meet those, they will not judge us as a worthwhile group. And so we have a combined testimony, and our young men have to be under control. Our younger women should be godly mothers and wives. And I'm sorry if that offends you, but that is just what the Bible's saying, and I refuse to preach anything but the Bible. And if you have a problem with these things, you take that up with God. And the culture that we live in is not in agreement with the things in the Bible at times, but I would rather believe God and trust Him and have the enmity of the world than to have them love me but be wrong with God. And so I preach the Word. And as we come to the young men, it says in verse 6, likewise urge the young men to be sensible. In all things show yourselves to be an example of good deeds, with purity in doctrine. He includes Titus in this. And so Titus has to have purity of doctrine and be dignified and sound in speech. And so I wanted to talk about what it means to be dignified or have dignity. So the word dignity is a serious word fixed on God. And if you want to know what that means to be fixed on God, Romans chapter 12 has a nice definition of it. He was writing the book of Romans and telling all the things that God has done to save us and all the things that we need to do to be saved. And then in chapter 12 and verse 1, therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, the things that He's done for us, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice. If you are a dead sacrifice, you can't do anything. If you're a living sacrifice, it means that you're still alive and you can live your life in sacrifice to God, holy sacrifice. The trouble with living sacrifices, we keep crawling off the altar, and we need to stay there and live for God. A living sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship or your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. And so you need to have a lordship settled, and you need to be a willing, living sacrifice, living for God. That means that He's number one, not you. And your life is primarily a life of service to God, living for Him. After all, He died for you. And in Romans chapter 10 and verse 9, it says these words, that if you confess with your mouth Jesus as Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you shall be saved. There are a lot of people want Jesus as their Savior, but they don't want Him as their Lord. And it's Jesus as Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, and you shall be saved. And it's hard for a young man to understand lordship. We work all our lives, in our young lives, trying to become independent of our parents, to be out on our own, to make our own decisions, to live our life. But on the other hand, when it comes to God, we can't live without Him. And He is our Lord. And we have to realize we're still under Him. And I remember when I made the decision to make Him my Lord, and it was a transforming decision in my life. If young men don't know who they're willing to give their life for, or what they're willing to live for, they don't know. They don't know what they're ready, how to live their life. And when I gave my life to Jesus Christ because of what He has done for me, I brought on a purpose. Even though I died to myself, I gained a purpose in life. And He became my Lord. And a lot of young men have to understand who they're living for and what their purpose in life is. And when they get that, suddenly a lot of things fall in place for them. And to have lordship properly defined in your life as Jesus is Lord, it tells you in some ways what you're to do with your life, where you're supposed to live, where you go to church, how you serve, and who you marry, and all those things kind of fall in place, and you live a more dignified life. Now, I want you to understand, for me, it's very important for us to understand that dignity does not preclude that you have a sense of humor. It's a serious life, but it does not mean somber or a sourpuss. And so that was important for me because I had a sense of humor, and I still do. So dignity has something to do with the lordship of Christ and how you live your life. Areas of dignity, we are to be seen as a stabilizing asset to the country. Young men are to be a stabilizing asset to the country. Look at Romans chapter 12. Romans 12. And I'm starting with verse 15. I'll back up to verse 14. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. That's interesting. You're not supposed to be reactive to people that persecute you. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Get with the program. If somebody's mourning, you should mourn with them. If somebody's rejoicing, rejoice with them. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. Do not be wise in your own estimations. So a young man is to have these things under control. He is supposed to not be high-minded, associate with the lowly, not think too highly of himself, and not be revengeful. Never pay back evil for evil to anyone. Respect what is right in the sight of all men. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. See, you're a stabilizing influence. Never take your own revenge, beloved, but leave room for the vengeance of God. You go to chapter 13 of Romans. It says every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities. So no matter who's president, you don't say F you and then the president's name. They aren't disrespectful like that. even if you don't like a person's policies or they might not be behaving the way they ought to. They're still the leader, and those which exist and are in authority by God are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. So it's a fine line. We live in a democracy, a republic technically, and we're allowed to say what we think. But even when we say what we think, we ought not say everything that we think, or say them couched in expletives and mean ways of saying things, and understand that we are not to be rebellious. We may not like something, but it doesn't mean that we should necessarily overthrow our government. So our young men are not insurrectionists at heart and rebels. Our friends in India, they're persecuted. Christianity is a minority over there. And what they do is they have these orphanages over there, and they take care of the orphan children, give them an education and feed them and help them to learn about God. And every place else they persecute the Christians, but because of the good works that they do in this one area, and they work very hard to show that they are loving and kind, they give them a pass and don't persecute them. Leave these people alone. They do good things. Well, my friends, it's very important for us, even if we are in a country that's unsympathetic with what we believe, we behave ourselves, and as we behave ourselves, we attract respect. Now, Jacob had some comments about some of his sons that didn't act up well. If you turn in your Bibles to Genesis 49, okay, and as you're turning there, Joanne, would you get me my water glass over there, sweetheart? Thank you. And Genesis chapter 49, and we're looking at verse 5 through 7. He was on his deathbed, Jacob was. By this time, he was mostly known as Israel. And he was giving a rundown, even some prophetic statements about his sons. And it came to Simeon and Levi. In verse 5, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Now they had the same mother. Their swords are implements of violence. Let my soul not enter into their counsel. He said, I wouldn't want to be taking your counsel. You're too violent. Let not my glory be united with their assembly, because in their anger they slew men, and in their self-will they lamed oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will disperse them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. When the nation of Israel came to the promised land, after they'd been in Egypt some 400 years, Simeon he just had cities here, here, and here inside of Judah. And then Levi had cities here, here, and here, cities of refuge inside of all Israel. And they were separated from one another, and they were not allowed to be very concentrated because of what they had done. Now, to get a little bit better idea of what happened in Genesis 34, there was a man named Shechem, and he laid with Dinah, their sister, before they were married. And he asked to be married to her, but he got things backwards. And Jacob decided, this was his only daughter, that if they would take on circumcision, all the men in their household, that he would unite with them. And so after they were circumcised, about the third day, when they were pretty sore, it says here in verse 25 of Genesis 34, now it came about on the third day when they were in pain, that two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brother, each took his sword and came upon the city unawares and killed every male. So this was a big enough place. It was called a city. And even though it was only Shechem who had violated their sister, they killed all the males. That is kind of overkill, if you ask me. And each took his sword and came upon the city unawares and killed every male. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house, because they were married, and went forth. Jacob's sons came upon the slain and looted the city, because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds and their donkeys, that which was in the city and that which was in the field, and they captured and looted all their wealth and all their little ones and their wives, even all that was in the houses. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and my men being few in number, they will gather together against me and attack me, and I will be destroyed, I and my household. But they said, should he treat our sister as a harlot? Well, no, he should not have treated their sister as a harlot, but they shouldn't have killed every man and woman, every man in the area who had made a covenant with them, and upset every house and upturned all those things and took the children and the women, made them slaves or whatever, and all the cattle and all the wealth. And so this was way beyond what they should have done. So young men can have great anger and overdo things. So you have to be very, very careful. So the penalty to Simeon and Levi stuck. So young men, they need to be dignified as Christians, need to keep their anger in check. That's not easy for young men to do, and they really have to work at it. Young men are to be gentlemen around others based on their age and sex. Timothy was told that he should treat older men like fathers, similar age young men as brothers, older women in the church as mothers, and women more their age as sisters, with all purity. And so young men need to be dignified. I remember I was speaking at a camp Christian, and there was probably 50 kids there, and we had some older young people, teenagers, and this young man, he just couldn't keep his hands off the girl he was beside. She was letting him. He had his hands all over her, and it was very distracting, very inappropriate. Something had to be done, but people didn't want to interrupt me, or maybe they couldn't see what I saw because of my perspective. I stopped and I said, young man, are you going to marry that girl? He was like 15. He says, no. Well, I said, so take your hands off another man's wife. And of course, she didn't like it that he didn't seem to profess his love to her the way he was treating her. And that kind of ended the thing right then. But the fact of the matter is, we should treat young ladies that are our age like they're our sisters, and treat them with respect and dignity. And I'm telling you, we don't get that in our day and age. What's on TV and stuff, and it's so loose, and we tell the girls that they can just abort their children, and boys, you can do whatever you want if the girl's willing, and all this sort of thing. That's a bunch of hooey. And we need to be dignified and treat each other appropriately. And don't take your cues from the world. When I was a young man, there was a group called The Doors. They had a song that started out, "Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name?" And so here's a fella stating that he loves this woman. He doesn't even know her name. And there's so many things wrong with that opening statement, and yet there are people that they go to bars and they see somebody and they think, oh, that would be a nice person to hook up with. They go over and have some stupid opening line, and by the evening is over, they're off someplace sleeping together. And my friends, that's not love at all. It might have been better if they said, hello, I lust after you. Won't you tell me your name? And it shouldn't be that way at all. We need to treat these people, the opposite sex, with dignity and gentility. They're not sex objects. They're somebody's daughter or somebody's wife. And believe me, friends, after having had 3 daughters, and each one of them would go out on dates like to their proms or things like this. And I would want the young man to come in and meet me. More often than not, I knew about the young man, had a pretty good book on him before he even asked my daughter out. But he would have to come in and meet me, and I would talk to them about what their plans are and when they'd be home and all that sort of thing. And I would tell the young man, you bring her back just the way you got her. You understand what I'm saying? And so, I was being the gatekeeper and letting the young man know what I wanted from them. And so it's very important for this gentility to treat young ladies with dignity and appropriately. There was another son of Jacob, and he had something to say about him on his deathbed. It was his firstborn, not Simeon, but rather Reuben. And it says here in verse 2, gather together and hear, O sons of Jacob. He wanted all of them to hear everything he was saying, to each one in particular. And listen to your father Israel. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and the beginning of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Uncontrolled as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed. He slept with one of his maids. Then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. Now that happened some 75 years ago, and he hadn't forgotten about it. And it was something that ought not to have been done, because it was not dignity that he slept with one of his wives. And so, my friends, these things have a way of coming back and biting you in the end. And Simeon found out life has a way of catching up and penalizing you. He should have been the patriarch of the tribe, of the clan, but because of that, he became disqualified. So the young men, they need to understand that life isn't all about them or you. You need to get over yourself. It's not just about your pleasures. You have to understand that with those pleasures come responsibilities, and you have accountability. So your children should not be afterthoughts. Oh, how did that happen? No, even a bird knows you build your nest and then you lay your eggs. And family is a sacred responsibility. And when I was growing up, there was this idea the young man could do whatever he could get away with, and the woman was the gatekeeper. Of course, I didn't see it that way. What I thought was that the standard of sexual purity for the young lady was the same standard that I should have as well. And wanted to be a gentleman, although I didn't succeed every single moment of my life. But your children, you should see them as a great responsibility, and that you shouldn't try not regard that and just sow your seed willy-nilly. Chivalry should not be dead. Too many parents wink at bad behavior. All boys will be boys. I think that's sad. I think that young men will rise to the challenge that you give them. I remember my mother sitting down and saying, you're dating some girls, but you be careful, son, because some of these girls would try to entrap you. And so you be careful. And so it was very important for me to treat these young ladies appropriately. Remember, young men, your speech, your actions, your dress reflect on everyone in the church, but above all, Jesus Christ. And, you want to properly reflect that you have a dignified, holy, and righteous God, and that you are a representative of Him. And so get this lordship down. Understand who you represent as one who calls himself a Christian.